one makes you smile. I'm excited.
Once the portal is done, the rest of the Jimmy crew jump through the portal. His parents are now shown to be rich, and they have a Timmy can fully ask around. She wants to see his lab. So while not being able to wish for the lab thanks to Cindy, he hijacks AJ's lab to impress her, which works for the moment. Calamitous is shown to have stolen Jimmy's hypercube that he has stored a bunch of Jimmy's gadgets in. Timmy's dad once again mistakes Jimmy for Timmy in disguise and forces him to do the household chores, which stops Jimmy from getting Timmy keeps taking her to romantic so eventually he wishes that Cosmo and Wanda will only go and listen to them and their wishes to distract them for a bit so he can finally speak with Cindy. Finds out that he is after Timmy's or since Jimmy still thinks that. Anti-Cosmo, though, runs into Calamitous, who he notices is the rich. So they make a deal with each other. He will help work with Calamitous as the fairy he needs, but in return he needs to help break out the anti-fairies. So they go and set the anti-fairies free. Turns on him locking him up in jail with Jordan, and all the anti-fairies take to the skies and
Health up.
You take Rudy out before you go to sleep?
Yeah.
Send him out here.
Love you.
Love you. Don't forget to take mine.
As he wants to set off a bomb in Retroville to destroy the Earth and be in charge of the new world. Jimmy and Timmy are shown to have survived this fighting and were just turned into samples. Now as the bomb is getting prepared, they turn Cindy into a goldfish. The countdown begins. The rest of the
That's Rudy. He's just playful right now. Running around the house. Sorry, he's just trying to get comfy next to me.
It just seems that Jim and
Hi,
Neutron
handsome.
characters transfer better
Is that handsome? Oh yeah, I know. Huh?
but it did feel like a big event crossover that utilized some characters being left with nothing to do. So it was more fleshed out as Jimmy and Timmy now it's time for the final part titled The Jerkinators. Starting once again in Retroville, Jimmy, Carl, and Sheen are working on a portal device. They use it to look into other dimensions, with one of them being Dimsdale to see Timmy once more. Sheen trying to spend time with wishes to return to Retroville again to see Timmy. Jimmy overhears that thanks to his portal on the right hand side, which you can find his emoji there. They literally once again run into each other.
Pheromones.
Watching YouTube while streaming on YouTube, haha.
Jimmy and Timmy team up together to fight him. As the battle rages on in the background at the candy bar, we see the rest of the friend group finally take notice of what's happening outside. Sheen and Carl ditch the $17 bill on the foot. Jimmy.
Yeah, I am. What do you want from me?
See them put down their fuse and just hang out. Hey, here's that really cool intro bit. After sitting around trying to find something to do, Eustace Strish shows up in town and causes havoc. Jimmy and Timmy team up together to fight him. As the battle rages on in the background at the candy bar, we see the rest of the friend group finally take notice of what's happening outside. Sheen and Carl ditch the set. Jimmy and Timmy fixing Jimmy's spots. As Carl and Sheen start becoming extremely jealous of their new family. Chester and AJ find out that Timmy has new friends that aren't them, and Timmy takes Jimmy into the world of the Crimson Chin to fight his rogues gallery of enemies. They find out they're beating up these bad guys just a little too easy and seek more of a thrill at this point since they work so well together. While heading out, Jimmy drops his portable portal, or the Porta Portal, as Chester and AJ sneak their way into Retroville as well. All the friends meet together and all are mad at Jimmy and Timmy.
Okay, this one's cute.
Cosmo and Wanda suggest that while they are creating this villain, rather than tossing all their other friends, that they can so some other person can join him after they're done. So Timmy, rather than typing that, misspelled it, typing adaptable. I wonder how that's gonna turn out. When Cindy breaks into the lab and tries to distract them, they ignore her, send her out of the lab, and head back to Timmy's to work on the rest of this villain project. Cindy has Chester and AJ fight over her instead, but they run into the villain who is waiting for Jimmy and Timmy. They tell him that, hey, you're being ditched just like we were, but he doesn't want to believe that, so he waits, and waits, and waits for such a long time that seasons change, or as Cosmo says, wow, I can't believe all this weird weather, day and night cycles, etc. all happened in 1 hour. The villain, now actually angry, both sad and
Just
filled
give
with
them
rage,
both
starts
a
adapting,
light
getting
scratch.
stronger and more powerful. So when the villain finds Jimmy and Timmy, he finally is the villain. breakout
this.
shows of the early 2000s, handling it with tact and care. Codename Kids Next Door. 81 total episodes spanning across 6 seasons. Well, we're not there yet. August 31st, 1960. Very interested in cartoons from a young age, but also comic books, and the world of superheroes, particularly the X-Men, of which he considered the candy to be a direct inspiration from the concept of, quote, evolution. He will internationally superheroes. Upon graduating, he attended Cookstown University, studying graphic design. His father would often discourage him from being disciplined when it comes to manufacturing. Everyone would often think about those moments when it came to what he wanted to do. Corbijn would move from Philadelphia to New York City to work at Buzzco Associates Inc., an animation studio that produced animated TV specials, commercials, short films, and the like, for those such as Sesame Street. Every year, hundreds of inside the woods of North America. I'm talking about people being right in front of someone, and in a second they're gone and never found again. Or somebody goes missing and then they're found again, but in a location that's impossible to get to. One former police detective named David Politis has investigated thousands of these strange disappearances, and he documents what he finds in his incredible book series called Missing 411. Today, we're going to look at 3 of his cases that, even amongst strange disappearances, these stand out as particularly bizarre. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel, because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to make the like button a hot pocket, but don't let it stand in the microwave for 2 minutes. Instead, serve it to them immediately, so that when they bite into it, they are met with the tongue slap. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Alright, let's get into today's stories.
Wheel of Fortune.
In the decided he wanted to go live in the wild. His family believed this was due to his obsession with the Hollywood film Into the Wild, which is about the true story of Christopher Candless, who gives up a promising career to go live off in the wilds of Alaska. Christopher would ultimately die in the wilds of Alaska, being a poisonous plant, or some say he died from starvation. So about a year after Dustin's high school graduation, he was 19 years old.
I'm excited.
2013, he finally got the to go live out in the street, living in the wild. So he was on this cross-country road trip, stopping at different points along the way, living out in the wilds. His family knew he was really fixated on this and couldn't talk him out of it, and so they ultimately accepted it and said, just be really careful. So in early March, Dustin heads out on this road trip, and nobody hears from him until March 15th, when he calls his parents and says, I'm in this tiny town called Fields, Oregon, and I'm at a gas station. Everything's going great, nothing to worry about. The very next day, Dustin called his ex-girlfriend.
The UN, for your information.
What he was saying just wasn't making any sense. He was talking about this mountain referencing that there were people that were after him, and it was just very confusing. And before she could get any more clarifying information from Dustin, he hung up, and then she couldn't get back in touch with him. So she calls Dustin's father, and she tells him that she had this really weird
Please
conversation with
don't
Dustin.
click any links.
This mountain, and even though I didn't really understand what he was telling me, he sounded Dustin's father thanked her, and then spent the rest of the day.
Speed up.
mean,
decided to go out and hunt.
it's not really overpowering. It's pretty good. It's pretty fun.
Sit and watch it. But since it's about 15 feet high, around 5 p.m. that day, houses just outside the woods. There was a cultural but from the tree stand where she was sitting, all she could see around her was trees. Shortly after Jan sat down, she started texting with one of her friends on her BlackBerry. Periodically, she'd hold her head up and look at deer, there weren't any, and then she'd go back to texting. The whole time this is happening, Jan could hear birds, and crickets, and squirrels, all the sounds of the forest all around them. So she went back to by about 6 o'clock, she didn't see any deer, and she was starting to get bored. She decided she would take a selfie with her BlackBerry. As soon as she was done, she went to she knew it was a hunter. But Jan would later say there was just something different about this. It was so silent, so text message to that friend she'd been texting earlier that said the woods just went completely silent, very odd. As soon as Jan hit send on that text message and lowered her phone, she immediately played 20 feet away in the tree that was right across from her, and she said it was the most unusual and terrifying thing she had ever seen. Moving left to right through the branches was this thing that she described as like a visual distortion. She said it was like looking across pavement on a really hot day.
I haven't said anything.
Except this one looked like it was alive.
I haven't said anything in the stream yet. I'm sorry.
Bun
I've
rant.
been a little silent.
She rubs her eyes, and when she looks up, this
Apologies.
thing has now moved down a branch closer to her and has stopped like it's perched on the branch, staring at her. And Jan's horrified, but she knows she wants to document it, so she grabs her phone and she raises it up and she takes a picture on her BlackBerry right as this thing had
Please don't play.
just seconds after this thing disappeared.
Please don't click any links because I don't know who it is or what it is, but there's a bunch of links that are getting posted, and I know they're like hackers and they're trying to like get your information, so please just don't look it up or don't click it. I don't know how to filter all of them because they just keep coming up with different links, and they're not even like joining. They're not like showing up as somebody joining here. It's just the comment shows up. It's very rude. So don't click anything, please.
And I had a clear shot of this thing, so I don't really understand how this photo got so messed up. After looking at just see this saran wrap person running through the treetops. You know, she just felt like that didn't happen. It must have been in my head. And as for this picture, I probably just blocked the lens. And that's it. That night, when Jan got back to her house, she did not tell her husband Bruce about what happened to her in the tree stand. Because again, she's telling herself it was all in her head. And they sit down in the living room, and they're both on their phones, and they're just kind of scrolling through the internet or emails.
I didn't know you were that so I wasn't talking, I was just trying to go through the room.
What are you looking at? And he said, you know, I just got a really interesting email from our nephew, you know, the one that goes to school down the road. He said that today they were outside for band practice, and at some point all of them turned to look at the forest, and there was a bright circular light that was kind of hovering in the forest, and they all stared at it for about 5 or 10 seconds, and at some point the light went back into the forest, and they didn't know what to make of it. And I guess one of his classmates said that a year before, the exact same thing happened, and apparently scared their instructors so badly that they canceled rehearsal and went inside because of it. As Jan is listening to her husband read this, she's sitting up and her heart is racing, and as soon as he finishes, she says, "What time did he say that happened?" Bruce picked up how intensely she was asking him, so he looked at the email, looked back at his wife, and was like, it was between 7:50 and 8. Why? At this point, Jan revealed everything that had happened to her while she was hunting, you know, seeing that visual distortion in the trees that looked like a figure of some kind, and she could tell him that the forest she was in was the same one their nephew was claiming to have seen. This circle As soon as he looked at the image, the first thing he asked her was, well, did your hair get in front of the lens? And she said, no, I was holding it about a foot away from my head, and my hair was in a ponytail and ball caps, and I can't see my hair. And so he looked at it again, and he asked her, well, did you put your finger over the lens, maybe? And she said, yeah, I might have. I don't think I did, but it's certainly possible. And so not really thinking much of this picture, he decides before giving the phone back to just check the resolution of the image, because whenever he would examine a picture, there was something to do, and he discovered a phenomenon. It turns out Jan's BlackBerry was only capable of taking pictures in 3 distinct resolutions. Basically, the size of the image could only come in small, medium, or large. And this picture she had taken of this thing she saw in the trees was a resolution size that was not small, medium, or large. It was some random size that the phone was actually not capable of producing. And so he asked his wife, like, did you manipulate the resolution settings? And she said, no, I don't even know how to do that. So Bruce looked at the other couple of pictures she had taken that day, and all of those fell into the small, medium, or large resolution size. It was just this one picture that was a total anomaly. And so Bruce was suddenly really intrigued by this image and by his wife's story, and so he continued to study the image, and he kept asking his wife questions about, how she was positioned in the tree stand, and where the sun was, and how far away this thing was, and everything about the whole layout. And eventually, Bruce started conducting experiments to see if he could duplicate this image his wife had created, and he got pretty scientific about it, and he could not duplicate it. Ultimately, because Bruce trusts his wife enough to the photo in any way, and he trusts his wife as being truthful about what she experienced in the tree stand, what she saw, and based on his years of being an optical physicist, Bruce believes whatever was in the trees distorted this image. And even if she had put her finger over the lens, which he doesn't think she did, and she doesn't think she did, the picture resolution was altered in such a way that something had to have an effect on it. There was a third-party effect on this picture. If you're interested in reading all of Bruce's scientific findings about this picture, I have included his write-up that he posted online in the sources below. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments what it is and where you found it, so give us the timestamp. And if you're the first to do that, pin you at the top of the comments section. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, please offer to make the like button a hot pocket, but instead of letting it stand in the microwave for 2 minutes, serve it immediately so when they bite down, you have the tongue-scalding cheese lava flow. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 3, 4, even 5 video uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's JohnBallin6. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is Mr. Ballin. If you have a story suggestion, please send it to the subreddit just called Mr. Ballin. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. Until next time, that's going to do it. See you. I'm talking about people that are right in front of someone and then in an instant they're just gone and they're never found again. Or in some cases they are found again, but they're in places that are impossible to access. One former police detective named David Politis has investigated thousands of these strange disappearances, and he documents what he finds in his incredible book series called Missing 411. Today we're going to look at 3 of the strangest Missing 411 cases. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please give the like button VIP access to the King to Ka roller coaster at Six Flags Great Adventure, New Jersey. And once the like button gets to the top of the ride, go ahead and manually turn off the ride and then close the ride. So please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Alright, let's get into it. On May 21st, 1941, Betty Albright and her 3-year-old son, Eldridge, traveled to her mother's house in rural Woodstock, Maryland. Betty had asked her mother if she would look after her son for the afternoon so Betty could catch up on some much-needed needed sleep. They arrived at Betty's mother's house at about 1:30, and right away Betty went inside, handed her son to her mom, and went upstairs to take a nap. As for Eldridge and his grandmother, they went out in the backyard to play. Now, Eldridge loved going to his granny's house because she had this enormous backyard to play in. If you were standing on her back porch looking out, it would be 250 meters of just open grass around it, and it butted up against this forest. And in the middle of the property, looking straight out of the forest, there was this 3-meter gap in the trees. If you walked through it, it would bring you down to this great bed. It was seasonal, and there was very rarely any water running through it. From the porch, anyone that was standing in this creek bed, you could clearly see. And so Eldridge was allowed to play in the creek bed, so long as he didn't go right or left in the creek, which would be out of view from anybody on the porch. And so this particular day, when Eldridge and his grandmother went outside, Eldridge wanted to go play in the creek bed, so he immediately starts running across the yard towards it, along with his grandmother's 3 dogs. As for his grandmother, she just didn't have the energy to go to the creek bed, so she decided she would just sit on the porch and read a book and keep her eye on Eldridge. She remembers watching her parents go all the way across the yard, get to the break in the trees, and then step down and begin moving around with the dogs, and throwing rocks, and having a good time, clearly in view. And for the next 5-10 minutes, she just stared directly at her grandson and the dogs. And at some point, she picked up the book next to her, and she began reading the book, and then periodically looking at her grandson, and then back down to the book. At about 2 p.m., she was looking down at her book, when she heard her grandson yell out. Now, 3-year-olds yell out all the time. Sometimes it's a big deal, and sometimes it's not such a big deal. But oftentimes, the sound of their voice gives away how serious it is. No matter what they say, it's like their tone gives away, should I take this seriously, or is this just a kid being a 3-year-old? And she would say that the way he was yelling sounded like a real emergency. When she poked her head up, even though she had seen him, less than a minute ago, playing in the gap in the trees, now she's looking at him, and the dogs are gone. And so, of course, she's alarmed. She hops out of her seat, she goes down the steps, and she starts running across the yard towards Eldridge. And she's yelling his name, and she's walking quickly. When she got about halfway across the yard, she heard Eldridge yell out again. Except this time, his voice was coming from way off in the forest, way farther away from the last time he had yelled out. It gave the impression to her that he had moved a great distance from the last time he yelled to her. And it triggered something inside of her that was telling her that something was terribly wrong. And she began running towards the creek bed. Still no sign of the dogs. She can't see anything. She's just running towards the creek bed. When she gets about 10 meters away from the break in the trees, she hears her grandson yell out for a 3rd time, barely audible, way off in the forest. He yells out for help, and as he's yelling, it sounds like someone has stifled him and covered his mouth mid-yell. So she runs through the break in the trees down to the creek bed where she stops, and she looks out in front of her, and it's just dense forest. There's no Eldridge, there's no dogs, there's nothing. She looks to her right down the creek bed, and there's nothing down there. And then she looks to her left, and one of her dogs is in the creek bed, maybe 10 meters away, facing away from her. And the dog is positioned in such a way that it's clearly looking at something. And so she runs down to the dog, thinking she's going to see maybe Eldridge or the other dogs, but there's nothing to do with the dog. The dog is just rooted to the spot. Its hair is raised, it's growling, and it's taking little steps back like it's been spooked at whatever it's seen or whatever it's looking at. And she just looked up and tried to look in the direction the dog was looking, but there was nothing. It was just forest. And so at this point, she felt certain that someone must have abducted Eldridge. So she turns, she tries to pull the dog to come with her, but the dog's not budging. And so she runs back to the house to wake up Eldridge's mother. The two of them come back down to the creek bed. The dog is still in the same position, growling and staring in the same direction as if whatever it's looking at hasn't gone anywhere. And they look for a couple more minutes, yelling for Eldridge, and the grandmother is telling her daughter, look, I think he's been abducted. We've got to call the authorities. And finally, she relents, and so they do manage to get the dog. They run back to the house. Shortly thereafter, the state police showed up with this huge contingent of searchers, and they immediately went down to the creek bed, where they started pushing predominantly to the left side, which is where the dog was angled, and it was also where the grandmother had heard her grandson yelling from. And very quickly, police discovered some of Eldridge's footprints about 50 meters down on the left side of the creek bed. They were in some sand right at the edge, and they were walking away as if he was leaving the area he had been told to stay in, which was in that gap in the trees. But interestingly, the footprints, it looked like he had been walking for maybe 20 or 30 meters, when inexplicably the prints just stopped, as if he stopped in the sand where he was. But had he gone gone right, left, straight, turn around, heading on in any direction, there would have been additional prints in the sand, but there wasn't, which gave the impression that was where someone must have lifted him up and kidnapped him. But they never found any prints connected to a kidnapper. For the rest of the day and that night, they would not find any more signs of Eldridge or the other two missing dogs. The next day, about 24 hours after Eldridge had gone missing, there were a number of search crews that had gone well outside of the primary search area in hopes of maybe finding one of the two lost dogs. They were bring them to the lost child. And this one crew that was 4 miles away from Eldridge missing, they were walking past a swamp when one of them heard what sounded like a child whimpering. It was coming from inside the swamp. And so immediately they turn and start walking into the swamp, which had fairly deep water. And they get to this clearing and they see there's this rocky overhang with high grass all around it, kind of forming like a cave. And they hear this whimpering again, and it's coming from underneath the rock. They rush over and they're pulling the grass aside, and sure enough, tucked under the swamp, inside of this kind of makeshift cave, is Eldridge. He was laying on this really well-constructed bed of pigs that looked like an animal's den. So either Eldridge had found an animal's den, or he had built himself this beautiful bed of pigs. When they approached him, he was sleeping underneath this rock, and so that whimpering sound he was making, he must have been making it sleep. And so as they got closer to him, he woke up, and he kind of sat up, he was very groggy and confused, all his clothes were really good, he wasn't wearing any shoes, but he overall seemed okay, he just was very confused. So they scooped him up and they brought him back to search headquarters, reunited him with his mother and his grandmother, and everyone's just so relieved that he's alive, but at the same time people were like, how did he get 4 miles away in the middle of the swamp? And so after the doctor cleared him, saying he was okay, besides some scratches and bruises,
BYN.
the police,
For your
along with the mother
information.
and the grandmother, sat down with Eldridge and asked him what happened. But unfortunately, Eldridge appeared to not know this had even happened. He didn't even know he had spent 24 hours out in the middle of the woods by himself. It was like he had blacked the whole thing out. Because Eldridge was found alive and unharmed, the police did not continue to investigate this case. And so we don't know what caused him to suddenly be yelling for help and appear to be drifting farther and farther into the woods. We don't know what the dog saw in the creek that scared it so bad.
Okay, well,
we don't know how Eldridge moved
I won.
4 miles through a dense forest
I
over
beat
multiple
Satan
swamps,
and I won.
only to wind up in yet another swamp inside of a cave.
Yeah.
Although the police came out and said Eldridge must have just wandered off on his own, basically
the next
everybody
scene.
involved in this case believes someone or something abducted him. It's just very fortunate he was found alive. Unfortunately, there's no clarification about what happened to the other two dogs, although the way it's worded in the story, it does sound like they were never found. In the 1950s, the Thorpe family lived in Dunbar, Pennsylvania, which was a small town of less than 1,000 people. Their house was on a very quiet street with very few neighbors anywhere near them, and their property was right up against this forest that was right in their backyard. Their daughter, 2-year-old Anna, loved to play in their backyard, but she was instructed to stay on the grass section of their backyard and not venture into the forest because the forest was snake infested. And Anna was terrified of snakes, and so she happily obliged. On May 5th, 1950, Anna was playing in her backyard in that grassy section, and her mother was in the kitchen looking out the back window into the backyard. And her mother looked down for a second when she heard her daughter scream. She looked up, and Anna was gone. She immediately ran outside, and she's yelling for her daughter. She's looking all around, and she knows she must have gone into the forest, and she's thinking to herself that she must have been bitten by a snake, and she's laying on the ground somewhere. That's why I can't see her. And so she runs into the forest, and she's screaming for her daughter, and she's not getting any response. She's starting to panic. All her yelling has gotten the attention of her 2 older sons that were in the house. They come running outside, and they join the search. They start fanning out and looking for Anna, and she's just gone. And so after only a few minutes of looking, Anna's mother decides that she has to call the police. The police show up, and they launch this massive search, and word got out to the residents of Dunbar that
What my mom would do
had gone missing.
after like
And so
2
virtually
minutes of looking and
Dunbar
not
showed up to
finding,
be a part of the
call the
search,
cops
and they combed that whole
immediately.
forest behind their property, and there was just no sign of
I don't know,
Anna. After the
procedures.
first 24 hours had gone by and they had not found any sign of Anna, they decided to expand the search area from a 1-mile radius to a 3-mile radius. And within just hours of this change, there was a crew that was 3 miles away from where Anna had been missing, and they found Anna, and she was alive. She was laying under this blackberry bush. All she had on was a single shoe. Next to her was a pile of clothes. When they went up to her, she seemed okay. They picked her up, and they brought her back to the search headquarters where they reunited her with her parents. A doctor looked at her, and the doctor said, you know, there's no signs that she was attacked. There's really no signs of any wear and tear on her at all. It doesn't even look like she was outside for the past 24 hours. When Anna was asked about what happened to her, she wasn't able to give any sort of meaningful answer because she's only 2 years old. But the reason this case is included in today's video is not because, you know, she vanished mysteriously in the forest and that she was actually found 3 miles away versus 1, or she was found just a shoe on. The reason it's included in today's video is because for her to have been found where she was found, the only way for her to have arrived at that spot was if she crossed 10 barbed wire fences. There was no other way for her to have gotten there. The only other way would have been a massive detour that she literally could not have covered. An adult probably couldn't have covered in the amount of time given. So this 2-year-old with no scratches on her body is found on the other side of 10 barbed wire fences. I mean, even if you take the barbed wire off of the fence, a 2-year-old climbing a large fence, that alone is kind of a Herculean task. And to do it without scratching your body, it's not possible. It's truly impossible. A May 7th article in the LA Times said the police were baffled by this 10-fence dilemma. They said the only way it would make sense is if she had been abducted and dumped there. But the police also repeatedly said there was no evidence to suggest she had been abducted or attacked or harmed in any way. It was just where she was found did not add up. Ultimately, the police came out with a statement saying this had to have been an accident, that Anna, the 2-year-old, managed to just somehow walk her way past all these fences and was found where she was, and thank goodness she's alive. But interestingly, the police confiscated her clothing and would not give that back to the parents, indicating there was further investigation happening even though the child had been found. But unfortunately, the police never revealed whether or not they actually discovered anything else about this case. And like in the Eldridge case, Anna's parents did not press for more information about what happened to their daughter because she was found alive and unharmed. Now, Anna's case might seem like some crazy anomaly, and that's all it is. But this is not the first time something like this
It's
has happened.
impossible to make out what you're saying. Emoji rolling on the floor
Less
laughing.
than 10 miles away from where Anna went missing, another 2-year-old, Ronald Collier, also went missing in the same stretch of woods. His mother had been sitting with him on their back porch,
I'm not
which overlooked the same
talking.
forest, and at some point his mother had gone inside, leaving Ronald sitting on one of the seats. When she came back out again, Ronald was gone. His mother estimated that she was inside for maybe 10 or 15 seconds tops. The police and the community came out in force, and they combed through the woods, and they could not find any sign of Ronald. And the police got really frustrated with Ronald's parents because they felt like this is impossible. How could this child not turn up considering the timeline you've given us, which is you went inside for 10, 15 seconds, and your son is now completely gone. He's completely vanished. Like, you must have something to do with this. And so the police made Ronald's parents take polygraph tests, and his parents passed all of them. The search for Ronald continued for several weeks, but unfortunately it was ultimately terminated, and they never found him. People in the area believed someone or something, maybe a bear or some other animal, was lurking in the tree line and watching Ronald. And as soon as his mother went in the house, they ran up and snatched the child and ran away with him. However, the police came out and said there was no evidence to back up that this child had been kidnapped, that what's far more likely is Ronald just got up and walked away and disappeared. However, 2 years later, when Anna's case happened, these similarities between her case and Ronald's case were just too much for locals to overlook. And so people began saying, you know, it looks like Anna was abducted and placed where she was ultimately found inside of those woods. And so probably whoever or whatever took Anna is the same person or thing that took Ronald. But Anna was just lucky enough to survive. Although this mystery predator theory is just that, a theory, it does seem more likely than Ronald in 15 seconds getting up and running off into oblivion, never to be found again, and Anna scaling 10 barbed wire fences in a 24-hour period without a scratch on her body. Unfortunately, though, we'll probably never know the truth.
He's just trying to relax. See?
In September of 2004, 49-year-old Robert Springfield, along with his 2 teenage sons, left their home in Wyoming, bound for the Bighorn Mountains in Montana. They were planning to do some elk hunting on the Crow Reservation, which is the homeland of the Crow tribe, and Robert and his family were members of the Crow Reservation and therefore had the rights to hunt on that land. The specific spot the boys were going to be hunting was Black Canyon, a particularly steep and rugged area. But Robert was well equipped for this type of environment because he had previously served in the United States Marine Corps in their Special Operations Unit, which would have meant he would have received a very high level of outdoor survival training, which is perfect for living up in the mountains. Robert's sons had apparently learned a lot from him and were very competent outdoorsmen as well. They arrived at the reserve on September 19th and immediately headed out to do some bow and arrow hunting. Their plan was the 2 boys would break off from their father and head over to the edge of the canyon and attempt to drive elk down into the valley so their dad could take a shot at them. But late in the afternoon, the 2 teenage boys had not seen a single elk, and so it was getting to be time to head back to the prearranged meeting spot, and so they packed up their stuff and they headed there. The boys make it to the meeting area, and their father, Robert, is not there. So they sit down and they begin to wait. And an hour goes by, 2 hours goes by, 3 hours goes by, still no sign of their dad. They can't get in touch with them. They have no cell phone service. And so they're thinking to themselves, okay, worst case scenario, he got turned around and he'll have to spend the night out in the cold. But he's got warm winter clothes on. He knows what he's doing. He'll be fine. And so as the sun was setting, the boys did finally leave to go tell authorities that their dad was, lost in Black Canyon somewhere. But it was just not registering for them that this could be life-threatening, that something really bad could have happened to their dad. He was just this Superman figure to them, and it just did not cross their mind. Authorities launch a search that night that includes the use of helicopters with thermal imagers doing low flyovers of the entirety of Black Canyon. Thermal imagers pick up a heat signature, and so anyone that is alive gives off a heat signature. And so at night, if you were flying overhead and you saw a person in the middle of the canyon with virtually nothing else around them, they would stand out like a bright light. But that night, helicopters combed all over Black Canyon, and they never saw Robert. However, authorities would say that, this guy, he's trained, a special operator. He probably went and found shelter. So he could be inside the cave, he could be in a shelter with tree branches, and it's obscuring him from the earlier. And so we'll just have to look tomorrow. But the next day, despite bringing out hundreds of searchers and bloodhounds and people on horseback and more helicopters and planes flying overhead, there's no sign of Robert. And after several weeks of still not finding any sign of Robert, they ultimately called it off. The family was obviously crushed, but more than that, they were just dumbfounded. The idea that something bad had happened to Robert, that just didn't add up for them. And so after the official search was terminated, they would continue to make trips into Black Canyon looking for their father, their husband. But unfortunately, like all the searchers, they never found any trace of him and eventually accepted that he was gone. 1 year later, in October of 2005, a hunter who didn't know anything about Robert Springfield or the fact that he had disappeared, this hunter is in Black Canyon in the same area where Robert Springfield had disappeared. And this hunter is walking through this really dense forest. He's alone, he's an experienced hunter, and he's not on a path, he's just kind of combing through the woods. And he starts to hear what sounds like a crow screeching. And at first, it doesn't really register with him. It's only in retrospect that he recalls this sequence of events. As he kept walking on, the screeching intensified to the point where he just could not ignore it. And so he stopped and turned to listen to the screeching crow, and he couldn't see through the dense forest, but he could tell it was in that general direction. This hunter said as soon as he stopped and he turned and began actively listening to this crow, he had this weird sensation that the crow was trying to actively communicate with him. It was a very strange experience. He had never had anything like it in his entire hunting career, and he spent lots of time outdoors. And so he felt like he had to go over and see what was going on with this crow. And so he starts walking towards the crow. He still can't see it. It's very thick vegetation, and he's getting closer and closer, and he gets to a place where he can just barely see this crow. It's in a clearing. There is this large tree stump right in the middle of the clearing, and this tree stump is not short. It's like 6, 7, 8 feet high in the air. It looks like this tree had broken in the middle and fallen over, and this crow is sitting on the top of this kind of gnarled stump. And the crow is just incessantly screeching, and from this hunter's perspective, he can see the crow, and he's kind of staring at it. And as the hunter is looking at this crow, the crow suddenly turns and
ready
looks
for
directly
bed?
at the hunter and recognizes the hunter can see the crow, and the crow stops screeching and is just staring directly at the hunter. And this hunter would say he felt so unsettled by the sudden behavior of the crow because it was almost like confirming the crow was looking for him, and now he had found him, and he stopped screeching and was looking at him. The bird continued to stare silently at the hunter to the point where the hunter felt compelled to walk out of the vegetation into the clearing to kind of confront the crow. And so he stepped into the clearing, and the crow the whole time is not screeching anymore, just looking at the hunter. And the hunter's standing in the clearing, and he looks at the crow, and the crow suddenly looks straight down. The hunter follows the crow's gaze down to the ground, and he sees at the base of the tree is a human skull. And the hunter's so taken aback by this, he looks back up at the crow, who's looking at him again, and the whole situation is so terrifying to this hunter that he just makes a note of where he is, and he runs. As soon as the hunter got out of the woods and was back in cell phone reception, he called authorities. Authorities showed up, and he showed them on the map where he had discovered this crow and this skull next to a tree. And sure enough, the authorities make their way out, and they find the skull right under this tree. The crow at this point is gone. When they walked up to the tree stump, they discovered it was not just a human skull, it was also a human femur bone right next to the skull. And then next to that was a set of boots that had been placed right next to them, neatly next to one another. And then next to that was a belt that had been tightly wound up and placed next to the boots. And then next to that was a jacket that was not folded, but was balled up. And inside of the jacket was a wallet containing cash and Robert Springfield's ID cards. The authorities launched a search in that area to look for the rest of Robert's remains, but unfortunately they were never recovered. Also, his bow and arrows were never found. The FBI was brought into the case because foul play was suspected, and they eventually determined that Robert must have been shot. And then they later recanted that statement and said actually he was hit by a falling tree. But if he was struck by a tree, then where is the rest of him? Wouldn't it have been in that area? And then why were all of his things neatly stacked? Certainly he wouldn't have done that after getting hit by a tree. So who neatly stacked his things after he was hit? And then also, where is his bow and arrows? But despite how improbable it sounds, that is the official theory. He was hit by a falling tree. The family, along with many other people, believe he was attacked by someone or something up in those mountains. But if he had been attacked, his sons would have heard the struggle because they were in an area where sound carried really, really well. And if a person attacked him, why didn't they take the money out of his wallet? Also, where Robert's remains had been found was very close to where his original campsite had been with his two sons on the night he had gone missing. And so it was firmly located inside of the initial search grid, meaning had he been under a tree or been left for dead by some attacker in that area, he would have been found in those first couple of weeks that they were looking before the search was terminated. So the fact that he wasn't found means either hundreds of people didn't see him, including a helicopter with thermal imager, or he wasn't there until after the search was terminated. And if so, where was he? And perhaps the weirdest aspect of this entire case is the claim by this hunter that a crow apparently lured him over to this tree stump where he found Robert's remains. If you believe this hunter's story, and many, many people do, then do you really think it's a coincidence that all of this took place on Crow Reservation, home of the Crow tribe? I think not. But will we ever know the truth about what actually happened to Robert? So that's going to do it, guys. If you found this secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments what it is and where you found it. So give us the timestamp. And if you're the first to do that, we will ping you at the top of the comments section. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't, her eyes were missing, her tongue was missing, parts of her lip was missing, and a portion of her skull had fractured, and a piece of her skull had been removed. Hey, what's going on, guys? Mr. Ballin here from TikTok, your resident scary storyteller. Today, I have a really cool story. It's actually one of the first kind of unsolved mysteries that really captured my attention and drew me into researching all of these kind of crazy unsolved mysteries that are out there. The too long didn't read version of this is you have 9 highly experienced hikers that go off into the mountains and die under extremely mysterious conditions. There are photos, journal entries. I mean, there's just a preponderance of evidence, but no one can make any sense of it. And to this day, it is one of the single most interesting things that I've ever found on the internet. So, hikers decided to head out on this 190-mile journey through the Ural Mountains in the northern part of the Soviet Union. Now, this was not a vacation. This was more of a mission to this group of experienced hikers. Because in completing this 190-mile journey, they would receive their level 3 hiker certification, which at the time was the highest in the country. So they would be the top dogs in hiking. So
I'm
on
getting
January
kind of
25th,
tired.
they set
I
off
think I'm
on
gonna
this
go to bed soon,
16-day,
but I'm gonna
190-mile
try and
journey.
finish this run
The group was in
first.
good spirits. The pictures of them, they were happy. They were on course. Everything was going right. And then they reached this kind of critical juncture in the trip. They reached this mountain pass that actually was subsequently renamed the Dyatlov Pass after the leader of the group. The leader was named Igor Dyatlov. And so they reach this mountain pass, and they know they need to go through. They need to negotiate this mountain pass. And so they set up camp, and the plan is early the next day they're going to attempt to push through this mountain pass, and hopefully over the space of one day they would be able to get through that mountain pass and set up camp on the other side. So early the next morning they get up and they descend through this mountain pass. But unfortunately a very bad weather system rolled in and it pushed them off course. And in fact, it pushed them onto a different slope that the local Mansi tribe called Dead Mountain. And so they get pushed off course, they're not going to get to the mountain pass. And then one of the first strange things happens. For some reason, now this group of experienced hikers that should have known that their best bet at this point, because of the bad weather, and being pushed off course, would be to retreat off the mountain and find somewhere protected to spend the night. At this point, they got to set up camp somewhere. But for some reason, they decide to stay on the exposed slope of Dead Mountain, which means that they would be setting up camp in not only just a wickedly windy area, and there's like risk of avalanche and any number of things could happen, but they'd also be exposed to negative 40-degree temperatures. They're like out in the open, just getting crushed by the elements. But for whatever reason, they made camp right on the slopes of Dead Mountain. So when the hikers don't show up to a rendezvous point that they were supposed to meet at a predetermined time, the folks they were set to meet, who obviously didn't meet up with the hikers, they let authorities know, it was noted that they had not made rendezvous, but because this was an experienced group, this was not a, now let's send out the search party. It was more like, okay, they should have been here, but it's 9 people, they know what they're doing, they'll get here soon.
Friends till the
So
end.
and still, no one's heard from these 9 hikers. And at this point, a search party is sent out, even including military units are sent out to find them. And relatively quickly, the search party comes across the campsite on Dead Mountain. And what they find is just horrifying. So the first thing they notice is that the tent they had been staying in had been slashed open, except from the inside, meaning someone inside the tent had slashed it open. And then in the tent itself, neatly stacked, was all their cold weather gear, or the majority of their cold weather gear, like their shoes, their jackets, it's all there. And there's no sign of the hikers. And then near the camp, like literally right out of this tent, is this neat set of footprints leading down towards this forest. And investigators, when they looked at the footprints, they could determine a couple of things. One, the majority of the hikers had either been barefoot or only wearing one shoe. In addition, cadence, they were looking at the space of their footsteps. Their gait, I should say, was indicative of a group of people that was walking calmly. This was not a panicked run away from your campsite. This was a walking calmly away from your campsite with not the right clothing on, probably no shoes on, down to the forest in an exposed mountain slope with negative 40-degree temperatures. So investigators, they start following these footsteps down towards this forest, and it leads them to this area right at the outside of this forest, right underneath this big cedar tree, where there's evidence of a campfire. And around that campfire are 2 of the hikers' bodies. And they're just wearing underwear, they're barefoot, and their hands had been, like, scraped. The palms of their hands had been badly scraped. And the tree that was right next to them something or someone on the ground. Obviously, they did not. Within several hundred feet of that campfire, the investigators found 3 other hikers' bodies. They were similarly underdressed, and it appeared, the way their bodies had frozen, that they were actually trying to make their way back to the campsite. The investigators noted that one of those 3 hikers had a head injury that was consistent with someone repeatedly smashing their head. Another of those 3 had a strange rectangular bruise on their side. And then, oddly enough, while they were underdressed, each of those 3 were wearing the other's bits of clothing. It was like they all collectively put on the wrong clothes and not enough clothes. Despite the strangeness of the 5 bodies that were found and what they were wearing, or I guess what they weren't wearing, it was determined that they all died of hypothermia and that there was no foul play. It wasn't until May, when it cooled down a little bit and some of the snow had melted, that investigators were able to locate the remaining 4 hikers' bodies. And, it was really the condition that they were found in, the second group of hikers, that really took this mystery and elevated it and made it into an urban legend, because it makes no sense how they were found. So the remaining 4 were found in this creek bed that came to be known as the Dyatlov Den. They were buried under about 13 feet of snow. And so, of the 4 bodies that were found in the Dyatlov Den, one of them had simply died of hypothermia and kind of was a lot like the first group, right? There's no severe injuries, really just they died of hypothermia. But the other 3, that was not the case at all. The 7th hiker had a skull fracture that occurred right before he died. The 8th hiker had these extreme chest fractures that it was almost like he'd been hit by a car. The 9th hiker really was the most unfortunate. Not only did she also have her chest caved in, but her eyes were missing, her tongue was missing, parts of her lip was missing, and a portion of her skull had fractured, and a piece of her skull had been removed. Even more bizarre is, in this second group, they had all taken pieces of clothing from the other, indicating that they had all died at different times. It was like one would die, and then the other hikers would take their clothes and put them on, and then someone else would die, and they would take their clothes and put them on. And I guess even stranger than that is the clothes themselves had traces of radiation on them. The Soviet government was quick to close the case. They cited either a natural disaster or perhaps the hikers' incompetence as the result or the reason behind this horrible tragedy. But nobody
I forgot to use the Sorry, I'm not sure.
Early on, after this case has been closed, the Soviet people, they started to believe a couple theories. One of them was there was this local Mansi tribe that was in the area that perhaps ambushed the hikers and killed them, and kind of explained the reason for the hikers suddenly abandoning their tent and not being dressed, and also the injuries of the second group. That could be explained by an attack by this Mansi tribe. But there was a couple issues with that theory. One, the Mansi tribe is known as this incredibly peaceful tribe that is just very much. There was also no other footprints in the area. It was just the footprints of the hikers that were in the area. Another popular theory is a swift and violent avalanche that they couldn't have seen coming, and they hear it at the last minute. They jump out of their tent, cut it open, they go running. But the problem with that is the tree line down near the forest they walked to, there's no sign that the trees have been damaged in any way. There weren't any debris from an avalanche like there would be. And in that area, there were locals like the Mansi tribe, and they didn't report an avalanche. They didn't hear an avalanche. And in fact, historically, there had never been a reported avalanche in that area. And subsequently, for decades afterward, there still has never been an avalanche there. Another popular theory is that the reason they left their tent in the first place is because when you get hypothermia, it can cause you to actually believe, kind of paradoxically, that you're actually too hot, and you start stripping your clothes before you ultimately succumbed to hypothermia. But again, that doesn't really cover down on the injuries of the second group. And then, of course, I mean, with any sort of unsolved mystery at this magnitude, there's theories that range from, government cover-up to the Yeti attack.
They had cut their way out of their own tent from the inside, their personal items and even a fresh meal perfectly laid out and ready to be eaten. They fled in a panic, mostly shoeless and some without socks, and none of their cold weather clothes despite the temperature being negative 13 degrees. A few hundred yards away, 2 bodies were found. Several hundred yards past them, 2 bodies were discovered under a tall tree, clothed in only underwear. One of the bodies had a 3rd-degree burn and a chunk of flesh from the right hand was in its mouth. All the bodies found were covered in bruises, cuts, and scratches. The rest of the bodies wouldn't be found until months later, and the shocking details only deepen what's the greatest mystery to ever come out of the Soviet Union. Late January 1959, and a group of 9 college students and recent grads are embarking on a trip of a lifetime. The group is made up of experienced hikers and skiers, but they've plotted a route that no Russian had ever taken. The trip would take them on a 16-day trip across the Urals and through the territory of the native Mansi people. It would be a grueling ordeal, exposing the group to bitterly cold temperatures and high winds, but the route avoided the dangers of trying to cross the mountains in winter by sticking to the lowlands. The trip would require great endurance, but the group of young Soviets was well prepared for the ordeal. The Ural Polytechnic...
Okay guys, we're at this cave, and we're gonna do some camping today, probably exploring.
Hello fun people, I'm Isaac Carlson, and today I want to discuss why Abuela Alma didn't respect Luisa. Before turning her back on Mirabel, Abuela didn't trust Bruno's intentions. She glorified Isabella and took for granted Luisa's power and resilience. Luisa was one of the madrigals who was under Abuela's influence and control the most. She had pressure on her that she couldn't escape for years. It was all because of the expectations that grew throughout her life. People knew she was strong, so they assumed she had the strength to take on all of their burdens. Luisa is a classic example of a middle child. Abuela spends all of her time praising Isabella's beauty, charm, and grace, and condemning what she sees as Mirabel's deviant and misguided behaviors. There was a belief in Encanto that Isabella was bringing forth the future of the madrigals, while Mirabel was always the one causing trouble for their family. The oldest daughter of Julieta was perfect, and the youngest was the worst, and that left no attention or concern for Luisa. Of course, though, that didn't mean there were no chores for her to do. Abuela always made sure Luisa's blessings were put to good use, which makes sense. Sure, there are a lot of madrigals who have helpful gifts, but when it comes to maintaining the village, no one comes close to being as beneficial as Luisa. While she can do simple tasks like collect donkeys, she also can move supplies, construction materials, and even buildings themselves. She can reroute rivers, push mountains, and is as tough as the earth. Luisa could shape the world around her with her bare hands, and in response to such a powerful gift, Abuela set her out into the community to serve everyone without considering the load she was placing on her granddaughter and how she was treating her. One thing I remember being told by my mom growing up was that my friends would treat my younger brother Adam the same way that I treated him. So if Adam came into my room and I screamed at him, as I often did, then my friends would also act like he shouldn't be around. They would also treat him like he was an annoying kid brother. But I didn't want my friends to think that they could speak to him like that. I had to be more aware of how I was treating my brother, especially around other people. And in Encanto, Abuela set the tone for how the village was supposed to interact with Luisa, and she treated her like a servant. When Abuela calls for their family to start setting up Antonio's ceremony, Luisa is supposed to just run to her call.
Luisa, the piano goes upstairs. I'm on it.
Even before Antonio receives his gift, most of the madrigals are enjoying the celebration or welcoming people with their gifts. But Luisa, she's a donkey attendant. Luisa is literally lifting people off of their animals, giving them a parking slip, and parking their donkeys. I thought we learned from Shang-Chi that the parking attendant isn't necessarily a great role for someone with lots of potential.
Parking cars. Super hard. Thanks, bro. Been winning a passenger driver's test. Live the dream like me.
It feels like Luisa is just another powerful donkey for the town to use instead of what she actually is, one of the most considerate, giving, and valuable people walking amongst them. I mean, when Abuela wants Luisa to get them a piano after Mirabel's warnings about the cracks in the casita, she literally just claps her hands like she's a dog doing what she's doing.
Music.
And those expectations are then put on her by people outside of their family, even when Luisa is at home. It's just hard to watch Luisa be the only madrigal who's
The
ordered
hermit.
around all the time by everyone in the village.
LOL from
Like when the
Spooky
response
Stories to
visit, she's
Encanto
expected to
series in
serve
2
them just as she
suggestions.
serves Abuela
for you.
and ensuring Mirabelle didn't screw it all up. The fact was that throughout most of Luisa's life, no one came to her aid about her insecurities because no one noticed them in her. And she doesn't even receive any thanks for her efforts. No one appreciates or sees the sacrifices she makes to help everyone. And what makes it even worse is the fact that most of the time people only acknowledge her when they need her help. That's why she feels like her only worth derives from her acts of service. Luisa became as helpful, hardworking, and understanding as she could and established a facade of strength in hopes of receiving love. But that also meant that she never was the most pressing matter for Abuela. She was shut out of Abuela's concerns because she never seemed to need her as much as Isabella and Mirabelle did. Luisa fell through the cracks, even though she was drowning. That's why when Luisa's powers began to fade, she broke down so quickly, especially during the meal with the Guzmans. But Abuela knew before that dinner that she needed to talk to Luisa about how she was doing, because Abuela saw that she was upset. Instead of going to Luisa's side, though, she told Mirabelle to stop whatever she was doing, and then got the Guzman so that Mariano could propose to Isabella. Even when it was clear to Abuela that Luisa needed her help, she still ignored that call so that she could focus on Isabella and Mirabelle, and that's because she believed their actions were having a larger effect on their home. Luisa was on her own for years, dealing with the crushing weight of Abuela's expectations without any support from her or anyone else. But Abuela wasn't resting either. Since the moment she lost Pedro and received the miracle, she'd been constantly fighting to ensure that the new home they had could not disappear like it had when she was a young woman. Abuela was hardened, burdened with grief, and unwavering in her determination to keep her and her family together. She was misguided as she focused on the results of her family's magic instead of showing everyone her love, but she was working constantly. So I think when Abuela looked at Luisa, she didn't see someone with burdens. She saw someone who was committed fully to the family. Due to her distorted reality, she thought Luisa was doing everything right. The truth was, though, that they were both living a joyless, high-stress, and draining life, but they continued to endure because they thought they were serving their family and were scared about what would happen if they stopped. The pressure of keeping the Madrigals together passed to Luisa, and Abuela just couldn't see how that weight was damaging her and making her her loving, kind granddaughter. Because of Abuela's own crushing burdens, she was unable to respect Luisa and everything she did for their family. Of course, though, even with that rough history between them, Luisa never stopped loving her grandmother. I mean, Luisa protected Abuela when the casita was beginning to fall. She helped rebuild their home and was thrilled to be alongside all of the Madrigals. But she also needed moments to breathe. Fun people, thank you so much for all of your support on my Encanto videos over the last few weeks. Hello, fun people, I'm Isaac Carlson, and today we finally need to talk about Bruno, because there is so much to know and share about how his powers worked, why his
Friends
power was
till the
different
end.
from everyone else, and what led up to him being driven away from the Madrigals. Today we're
Speed
exploring
up.
the entire heartbreaking backstory of Bruno. And of course, if you'd like to see all of my discussions on Encanto and all of Disney Animation's future films, consider subscribing. Now, Bruno Madrigal was born to loving parents Alma and Pedro, and was also a triplet. The firstborn of his siblings, according to director Jared Bush, was Julieta. Then came Pippa, and finally, Bruno was born last. So Bruno was the baby of his family. Unfortunately, though, soon after his birth, the tragedies that would plague his life began as their family was forced out of the village he was born in due to violent bad men. And I've made a whole discussion linked below about who they are and what inspired them from the history of Colombia if you'd like to learn more about where they came from. The aggressors were dangerous people who were targeting innocent individuals like the Madrigals, which is why they followed Alma and Pedro's group and inevitably struck down Bruno's father. Before Bruno could talk or crawl or even get a chance to have a memory of his father, Pedro had been taken from him. But out of that loss came a magical Encanto for his family to live within. And when he turned 5 years old, Bruno and his sisters were each given an enchanted room within their considerable effort, especially when he was trying to see something specific. In early versions of Encanto, Bruno was even supposed to pass out or get very weak when he completed a vision of the future. As Bruno grew up, though, Alma started bringing villagers to have their futures foretold. She wanted their Encanto to be a paradise, and every year she wanted to prove that they deserved their miracle by using their gifts to serve the town. So Bruno followed his mother's request to use his gifts for the people, and it was around that time that he started to develop his ritual as a crutch to focus, cope, and prepare himself for the often emotionally taxing and physically exhausting job he had to undertake. Over the years that followed, the ritual began to feel like a necessity for him, as his role in the village became more stressful and intense, and he became more superstitious. He just wanted luck to be on his side because he wanted to bring people and his family good fortune. Donned in a ceremonial outfit, Bruno would encircle himself in sand within his vision cube. He would burn leaves and hold the hands of the person whose future he was looking to see. Bruno's vision would then appear before his eyes as they turned green, and then that vision would be forged onto green glass, and then, like clockwork, he would hope that the person's future wouldn't upset them.
If I see something that you don't like, you're gonna be all, Bruno makes bad things happen. Oh, he's creepy in his vision, killed my goldfish.
You see, Bruno was said to be an introvert who wasn't comfortable around people to begin with, and this social isolation wasn't helped by the fact that his gift was often interpreted as negative by the people who called upon his visions. Without knowing exactly how their lives would progress and with no accountability for how they influenced their own lives, the villagers slowly turned on Bruno as they came to believe that he was seeing their dreams only to create misery and chaos in their lives.
It was a nightmare.
Luckily, though, Bruno was able to meet a random rat or
Here
two
we
to
go,
give him
last
some
level.
company, as he often felt forced to be alone as he grew up, which only was exacerbated by his mother, who started to join in on the town's anger towards him. Almost desire to rise to their magical gifts led to extremely high expectations of her children. So seeing how Bruno's visions often led to people mumbling and grappling with prophecies they couldn't understand infuriated her. She wanted peace and stability and hope, and in their town, not uncertainty and darkness, which led to her looking down on Bruno. The very woman that forced him to create visions eventually resented the burden she made him bear. Abuela began to only see the worst in Bruno when he was growing up, which drove him away emotionally and physically. You see, when we look back at the triplets going through their ceremony to get their doors, Bruno's door is not in the same place as it was at the beginning of Encanto's events. When Alma's children are adults, Pepa's gold door and Julieta's blue teal door surround Abuela's red door on one wall, while Bruno's green door is around the corner from Julieta's, with a staircase leading to it. But in the flashback, Bruno's door appears to be between his sister's doors. Abuela's red door is nowhere to be found, and that's supported again when we look at the images depicting Alma with all of her gifted descendants. Bruno is between his sisters with his green door, and there is no staircase to be seen. At some point, Bruno's door moved, and I think that happened slowly over time. And when we know that doors can suddenly come in and out of existence, and that everyone's magical rooms are formed around them, and can be even larger than any physical space in a casita could allow them to be, so the space can be created anywhere. Plus, we also know that casita is able to construct stairs when a moment calls for it. So I think as Bruno became an outcast within his own family, his door faded away to a new location to isolate him further from the rest of the Madrigals. He was pushed to the side because of his family not understanding him and his gift, and the larger the distance he felt emotionally from them, the staircase continued to grow, and the placement of his door went farther and farther away. I kind of think that Pepa's wedding was probably a turning point for Bruno's relationship with his sisters. He arrived on his sister's big day just trying to be there for her and to show her he loved her, and she interpreted the action as a way to get into her head. At that point in time, he just seemed like a weird monster to everyone, no matter what he did. No one, not even his sisters, believed he cared about the family. Brown's lack of faith in him brought him to realize that if he told his mother the truth about what he saw, the family could turn on little Mirabelle. So in an act of defiance and keeping himself more safe, Bruno destroyed his vision and left his tower and family behind. He was no longer distant from his family. His place in the Madrigals was gone, and he also gave up using his abilities and his family's magic, which all culminated in Casita's connection to the room being broken and his door's light fading away. With his love for his family still present, though, and with the knowledge that it would be practically impossible for him to return to the Encanto if he ventured over the mountains, he instead went past the nursery, moved a large painting near Dolores' room, and broke into the walls. It's kind of funny he chose to do that near Dolores, since she must have heard him moving on the walls that night, but I guess she was going to have to hear him for years without anyone really caring or noticing.
I associate him with the sound of falling sand.
The burden of the future weighing on him, he built out a home for himself next to the kitchen, where he accumulated food, furniture, and a sizable collection of friendly rats to keep him company while his original room fell into ruin. In his absence, sand would flood his home, the pathways would begin to collapse, and his chambers were ready to be destroyed whenever someone entered again. Long before Mirabelle noticed that their family's facility was breaking down, and his rat pals saw it happening all around. Of course, the rats were comforting and kept the time on his own interesting, but of course, Bruno longed to reunite with his family. While he wanted to be with them and to be included again, at the time,
good
all
night.
he could do was
Love
watch
you.
from afar.
Yeah, my gift wasn't helping the family